wasn't thinking about my father. I was thinking Hazy, the leader of the band. You did a beautiful job embodying the fatherly qualities within you. We were talking before this service, and I asked her if she likes public speaking. She's like, yeah. Would you like to be a politician? Yeah, maybe. And so yeah, there's that. And maybe a prayer chaplain I see too. So thank you. So today's service is certainly in honor of Father's Day, which is a tricky business in and of itself. I just want to say that here, of course, as we did with Mother's Day, as Hazy did in this daily word, we want to make sure to remember that as we reflect on Father's Day, that we remember that qualities that are attributable to fathers are actually present in each and every one of us. And so a lot of times when we focus on these qualities, playfulness, discipline, leadership, whatever these things that we normally attribute to fatherhood, to whatever extent we have felt it or feel it lacking in our own lives, this can be an opportunity to reignite those qualities within ourselves, to help heal those places where the outer world doesn't reflect those fatherly qualities toward us. We can bring it forth in ourselves. Because we all know that, yeah, Father's Day is complicated. And for some of us, it is this amazing opportunity to gather with family and feel what love and what gratitude and what joy is there for us here. Not just from our biological fathers, living or dead, but from the father figures in our lives and in the world around us, and to just celebrate that. But of course, in the midst of that, for many of us, there is also this sense that Father's Day isn't always, or maybe ever really, about love and joy and gratitude. That for some of us, Father's Day brings up tremendous grief. For some of us, the grief is over a father or father figure that we have lost. And it could be lost through divorce in our lives, or lost through that person's transition. But for some of us, and I think I'm more in this category, there's a grieving around the father we wish we had, and the qualities that we didn't get to experience, and the letting go of that. And so if I were to think about my relationship to Father's Day, and I think about Facebook and that whole it's complicated relationship status, that's the one I want to check off, to say it feels mixed. Through our spiritual journeys, we might have done tremendous healing and forgiveness around our relationship to our fathers, our idea of fatherhood, and fathers in our lives. But there could also be a few places where there's still some tension, some unforgiveness, some areas that need healing. And so I wanted to just open this space to you to let you know, because I already see it looking out here. If you are wanting to well up, needing to well up and just cry this whole service, this is the space for that. If you are jubilant, though, I don't want you to squash that because someone else is in tears. This is the space where you can just be authentically who you are amidst the fact that, yes, Father's Day is not truly a holy day in the traditional sense, but because it is a recognized holiday, that culturally we experience it and we have it right in our face whether we like it or not. And so better to not address it, and instead bring it forward. Bring what's alive for you around this day forward. And I invite you in this space to hold all these questions for you of what is yet to be healed around fatherhood, what is yet to be celebrated around this notion of fatherhood. And I invite you also to simply open to this time where we have invited 3 congregants from our community to share their journeys around these questions. What is fatherhood to me? What was my relationship like with my father? How does being a father mean, to some degree, being anything but what my father was? And how does it mean being like what my father was? And so, again, primarily from a spiritual perspective, while honoring our humanity, I'm going to open this time for three gentlemen to share. It just so happens, I know fathers can be women too, so it happens it's all men today. Josh Halperin, Steve Bradford, John Greenleaf Maple have come here to share simply from their personal spiritual journeys. And so with that, I am honored to be able to hand over the mic to our first sharer for today, Josh Halperin. So Josh.
Thank you all so much. It's such an honor to be here. There isn't a role that I hold more dear than fatherhood. Along with the love and relationship that Jessica and I have formed, I hold it most sacred in my life. For those of you who don't know me, I have 4 children. Have a 22-year-old from a previous marriage, Holden. Shaylee is our niece who we're adopting, who's 17 years old, and she has been with us for 4 years, 3 years? 3 years. The second time that she's been with us. Her mom is Jess's sister, and unfortunately she wasn't able to care for her properly. So we have taken on that role, and I have fallen in love with her, and I initially just loved her as a niece, and I have grown to love her as a daughter. And then Hazy Grace Halperin, who you all have had the pleasure to know, who teaches me things every day as well. And then Harper Jean, who's with the kids today, and Sarah, and she'll be coming out a little bit later. Fatherhood started for me with my relationship with my own father. I am grateful that I had a father who taught me how to love, to have compassion for other people, to care, to be silly. He taught me some fun things to do as well, and some things that I thought were cool at the time. He taught me that it was okay to cuss. He told me that there weren't any such things as bad words, which I thought was very true and still hold, just hurtful words, and that there's a distinction to be made behind that. And I think that's very true, and it's also very conducive of just being kind and choosing your words in a way to ensure that you are being kind and compassionate towards others. I loved my relationship with my father. I know I am very grateful that I had a tremendous relationship with him while I was young. Unfortunately, like in so many of our lives, not everything goes as smoothly as we think it's going to go through. My father, at least metaphorically, left us and physically left us a couple of times. First time through a tumultuous divorce in which I was the youngest and often caught in the middle. And it was extremely difficult and painful to watch and to be part of. I struggled with that as a teen and in high school and going forward. And then ultimately, again, he left in the form of suicide when I was a young man in my early 20s. And this was a devastating blow to me. I did not realize that he had been hiding demons from me all of those years, and that he struggled so significantly with anxiety and depression. And it knocked me off my game for a while. And for a number of years, I attempted to just try to suppress it and numb it away. And I learned after too long that was not going to work, and luckily learned in time before I ended up hurting my own self. And the second big event, and I muddled through that, we'll say. I did some therapy, but it was challenging for sure. The second big event in my life was the divorce from Holden's mom. That was extremely challenging for me. When most kids probably dream about being firemen and doctors, the only thing I really knew for certain, my compass, bless you, my compass was that I wanted to be a father and a husband. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life from a career standpoint, but from a very young age, I did know, because of the relationship that I had with my parents, my father and my mother, that I wanted to be a father and a husband. And so when that occurred, it knocked me off my game again. Luckily this time, I had the maturity and insight to realize that I had a lot of work to do. So I started going to therapy and doing some deep dives into my past and understanding where this tremendous hurt was coming from, this feeling of abandonment, and how I was going to deal with that the rest of my adult life. That is also about the same time that I found unity, just coincidentally. I started going here and realizing that I had not pursued a spiritual side and that I was missing that in my life and wanted to have that. And Unity's foundation and the things that they taught were right in line with my beliefs, and I felt right at home right away. So for about 19 years, I've been coming to Unity and involved in classes. And Jessica and I got married here. We actually met online on Match.com, but found out on our second phone conversation that we were both not only congregants here together, but also that Jess was a prayer chaplain that used to greet me when I used to come in for the service upstairs in the balcony. And, what's that? For a year. Well, it was long enough where I certainly noticed her. And I did promise myself, because I wanted to come here to heal, that I wasn't going to date anybody here. So it took a lot for me to fight off at that point in time not to hit on her. And I'm glad I didn't, because the timing was perfect and it all worked out. We met anyway. So it all worked out well. Since then, I've been enjoying fatherhood and pursuing my spiritual side, rather than to do what my father did, which was to suppress the anxiety and depression. I am learning to face it and share it openly with all the people I love in my community, and embrace it and understand that it's just part of something that I'm going to have to deal with all of my life, and and I'm going to do that the best that I can day by day. And I couldn't do it without the love and support of the family. This has led me to seek out, this time around, U-Nite, which I stumbled upon on Facebook. Good job, Nhien. And felt really called. I don't think that it's a coincidence that a year, in 1 month from today, will be 30 years since my father took his life. I was just turning 52, which was the age of my father, or actually 52, because he committed suicide 5 days before his birthday. Before that I sought out this community, I had some fear that potentially I might be entering into an age where I would be overtaken by the depression and anxiety as my father had and his brother had, so in the family, right? And I realized that the best thing I could really do is pay attention to it and to embrace it and to learn how to love myself as much as I love all of the people in my life. And I am pleased to report and announce that the view from this chair and the view of life is beautiful and spectacular and magnificent at its best, and I look for those times, and I intend to be here with you all for a very, very long time. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steve. Father's Day brings up a lot of emotions for me. Some of them good and some of them not so good. Give you a brief rundown of where I came from. My mother was a Pennsylvania Dutch, old school. I'm not sure if she even had a religion, but she got married to my father, who was from Kansas City, actually. He was born in Cleveland, Missouri, and she ended up having 3 children. I was the middle child, 2 sisters. My father then abandoned our family when I was about 2 years old. I have no really real recollection of him being in my life at all. And then my mother got remarried to my stepfather, who was very, very abusive to us children in all forms. And so I grew up with, like you mentioned, a sense of abandonment. Both my mother was emotionally abandoning us because she just wasn't there for us, and my father physically abandoned us. And so I grew up with this kind of skewed, absolutely no idea of what a father really was. But what back then there was TV shows like Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver, and I thought that's what it's supposed to be like. And what I didn't realize, from a child's point of view, I didn't realize that was not reality. But so I grew up with this resentment and fear. I lived in fear of the abuse and resentment, a strong resentment. And I didn't even know what the word resentment meant at that time, but it was fear and resentment drove my life. And I was raised in an old-timey Methodist church. We lived in the country about 50 miles from here, and we had a little Methodist church. And back then, the Methodist, if you remember the movie A River Runs Through It, the minister says a Methodist is a Baptist who can read. And that's kind of what we were. We were kind of, fire and brimstone. You're going to go to hell. And so I kind of grew up with this kind of skewed idea of what God wanted me to do and didn't want me to do. He didn't want me to play cards. He didn't want me to dance. He didn't want me to drink and smoke and screw around with women. And I was thinking I wanted to do all those things. And so I had this real conflict. And because I had no real male role model to ask questions to or even follow the example of, I just kind of grew up with this just not knowing. And the reason I mentioned all of my background is because I grew up thinking that, number one, in my church, I thought, at the age of 15, when they told me I couldn't dance and that kind of stuff, it's like, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to follow what these people are asking me to do, or am I going to do something different? And I had this, what I call my showdown with God at the age of 15, and I said, okay, God, if you're out there, reveal yourself to me, and I'll do what you want me to do. And at 15, I didn't have the consciousness to realize what God was to me and what it was. I was thinking it was this burning bush thing that was going to talk to me and give me direct orders, and I was going to follow him. But anyway, nothing happened, so I said, okay, I'm going to run this show myself. And I pretty much lived on my own willpower, my own self-sufficiency. I won't call it that, but because I didn't know how to even take care of myself. But I survived is what I did. And I met this woman who turned out to be my first wife, who was a really, really good person. Very good person. And we ended up having 2 children. One of them was biologically not mine, but she was my daughter. My oldest son, Michael Patrick, is now 45. He's living in Florida. And my daughter, who's biologically not mine, lives in Warrensburg. And growing up, my commitment to myself was I'm not going to do to them what my parents did to me. And so I was in their life, but I was struggling with this resentment and fear that had driven me into, I come from a long line of alcoholics and addicts as well. And I think I was born an alcoholic. I drank alcoholically from the very beginning. And so my addiction was, I was in battle with my addiction and my desire to be a good father. And I think what I did was I compartmentalized both those things. And my daughter says I was the best dad ever, and I'm thinking, well, I don't think so, but I'm glad you think that. And my son, who up until the time he hit puberty they were just great kids. When he hit puberty, I don't know, something happened to him, and he just went off the deep end, and he was following my footsteps pretty closely. And I wasn't contributing to that, but I didn't know. I mean, this is what I found out through my own experiences. When I say I think I was born an alcoholic, I think he was too, and I think my other son was as well. And I think it wasn't until I had my second son that I knew there was a genetic component to this that I just hadn't reckoned on. But having said all that, I did the best I could, and I spent time with them every weekend. I mean, we had a lot of fun. They were fun kids, and the role that I took on was just try to educate them, let them experience the life that I didn't have. I grew up in a really small farm town, and it was very limited on, options, things to do other than get in trouble and play baseball and fish. And so those are the 3 things I did. And then the older I got, it was more getting in trouble. Forget about the fishing and baseball. That's who wants to play baseball when you get in trouble. And but anyway, I stayed married for about 7 years, and I just thought I'm just too wild. I'm not a husband, and I knew that. And I tried my best repeatedly to be that, but I just was so ate up with my addiction and my own demons that I didn't know how to do that. And working on my own self-sufficiency and my own things that I could dream up on how to make this all happen just wasn't working, and it didn't work for a really long time. And my first wife and I were still good friends. She was a great mother. She when we talk about the mothers being fathers as well, she took on that role as well. And I think I did what I could, but I look back on it now and I thought I sure could have done more. It's not that I didn't love them and express my love for them and show my love for them, but it was like I was irresponsible and not a good. I won't say I wasn't a good person, because I think deep down I was. I think I've always have been. It's just I was controlled by my demons. And I got into recovery at the age of 39, and I got into counseling with this woman who was helping me. And one of the first things she asked me was, what was it like growing up in your family? And I go, what the hell does that have to do with me drinking too much? It's like, I had no idea what she was even talking about. And what I learned through a lot of, 8 years of counseling and recovery, not recovery, but recovery I'm still in recovery, and it hasn't stopped since the day I came in, but it's been an evolving process of me getting to learn who I am and why I do the things I do and what can I do about it. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with AA, but essentially they, seek and do God's will. And it's like, what does that mean? And this woman just happened to be an ordained minister as well. So we had a lot of conversations about God. And I've always had this spiritual yearning of what am I missing? What are these other people seeing that I'm not? That I need to investigate this more deeply. And I think for me, the answer is still ongoing. And I think I've got a fairly good understanding of what it means to me, but I don't know that I necessarily know what it means to you. And so that's why I still have that yearning, that investigative part of my body, my mind that wants to know these things. And I got remarried, and we had a son named Stephen Paul, and he was born about 4 blocks, or I guess about 10 blocks up the street on March 26, 1992, and he was my recovery baby. And I said, I'm going to do this right this time, and I put everything I had into this. But what I looking back, his mother was mentally ill. I was nut job, and alcoholic addict. I mean, it's like biologically he had 2 strikes against him coming out of the womb, and I thought that somehow I could abate that, I could change that, and I tried as best I could. His mother and I got divorced, and I became pretty much mother-father for him. His mother was somewhat incapable of doing things, at least to my liking, in any way, shape, or form. And so I really put a lot of energy, both mental, physical, emotional, into this child, and eventually, a year ago, in March, he committed suicide. And we had the service in the sanctuary upstairs, and we had his reception here in this room. And when I was back in this church, I'd been to this church before, and it just brought something back to me that spiritual quest is still within me. It's like I want to learn more about that, what that means, and what it means to me, and so that's why I started coming back here. And every time I come in this room, I think about that day, and a lot of times I'll tear up because this is a safe place for me. But it also reminds me of that loss that I have. And it's through the help of people like Josh and John and Shane and Nhien and Victor. I mean, there's a lot of people in this room today that have helped me on my journey and allowed me to heal as best I can in the way that I can. And when I met with Duke to talk about the service, one of the first things he told me was that grief was a positive emotion, and I go, boy, it sure doesn't feel like it. But he said it's a demonstration of the love that we feel for somebody that we can no longer express to them. And that helped me realize that it's not just pain. It is that love that is unexpressed. And I'm very fortunate. I have my daughter has 3 daughters that are just wonderful, wonderful kids, and they bring so much joy into my life. And they have, I think, what I wasn't able to do with my children the way I wanted to, I can do with them. They're very curious. They're very smart. They're just great kids. And they love their grandpa, and I love them. And one of them, my daughter was married once, and the father of her 3 children was a lot like me for some reason. I go figure that one out. But the youngest daughter was about a year old when he left, and so her name's Peyton, and Peyton and I have really bonded really well. I mean, she loves her grandpa. she's Grandpa's girl, and she's the first one to jump in my arms when I go see him, and it's like, so that there is that expression of love that I can give, and I think that's really what I think God wants me to do, is express love to whomever and however I can, and I think that's really the journey that I'm on, is trying to put aside my hurts and my feelings and my regrets and my hopes that haven't been realized, that I can then just be open to express love. And I think that in and of itself has been my journey. And
when Rev Nhien asked if I would share my journey as a father, and in particular share my relationship with my daughter Beth for today's service, tears welled up in my eyes and I quit breathing. So I knew this was the next right thing I needed to do in order to continue to evolve and breathe, which I've become rather attached to. As background, I am father to 3 sons: Philip, who was born 5 weeks prematurely, May 5th, 1972, and lived just over a day; Chris, born in 1975; David, 1977, and one daughter, Beth, who was born in Fort Kent, Maine, in 1979. I was married to their mother, Carolyn, for 23 years. We had moved to northern Maine with her parents, both retired teachers, in July of the same year Beth was born. And the kids really had a rather idyllic upbringing on 40 acres that was in the little town of New Sweden, which is a population of 893 spread over about 20 square miles. So from our house, we could see millions of trees and not much else, a field here and there in the corner of Lincoln Hansen's barn. But it was a great place for them to grow up. But things did become more difficult for the kids when their mother and I divorced in 1996. And it's especially hard right now because in July of last year, my daughter, Beth, was diagnosed with stage 4 inflammatory breast cancer that has metastasized to her lymph nodes and liver. She is suffering terribly from edema in her left arm and a frozen shoulder, and her back keeps going out. She now has to make a 5-hour round trip to Portland, Maine, twice a week to have that treated. And this is arising because they had to stop chemo 3 weeks ago to assess next steps, so the cancer is growing again. But I had an hour-long conversation with her first thing this morning, and she is the epitome of positivity. So I'm just so proud of her. I can't imagine where I would be emotionally right now were it not for the fact that I discovered U-Nite July 17th of last year, but I'm pretty sure it would not be a good place. That was about a month before I flew to New Hampshire to help Beth. That stay lasted until January 1 of this year and proved to be the most difficult period of my entire life. We moved Beth and her 2 children in with her brother David and his 2 children amidst the tremendous stress of the illness, the changed physical environment, financial worries, and everyone processing the many turbulent emotions around this in varied ways. My beloved wife, Maka, and I have been married since November 30th, 2003. She was in Maine for a couple of weeks during the time that I first started attending U-Nite, and I was excited to tell her all about it when she returned. I think her first response was, "What? A church? We don't do church." "Are you sure?" I asked her just to suspend judgment for a while and come see for herself. And it is so very fortunate that she did, because we only had about 2 weeks together before I left for New Hampshire. The U-Nite community reached out to her with a big giant hug, and soon she was involved in spirit groups and every opportunity to deepen her growth that she could find. We did not get much time to talk things were that busy while I was away, but it was such a tremendous help to me knowing she had been welcomed and was being lovingly supported through this tremendously difficult time. In like manner, Maka, Rev Nhien, and the U-Nite community who reached out to support me during this time were my lifelines to sanity. After all the family in New Hampshire had gone to bed each evening, I would journal, shed tears over the suffering I was witnessing, and often reread an email that Nhien had sent in response to my request for prayers and support. I started using lines from Rev Nhien's email as a daily mantra just to survive, and quoting her now, "There are no problems to be solved or circumstances to be changed. There are only people to be loved, perfection to be honored, and gratitude to be felt." As difficult as this is to speak about, I'm here today because I very much want to honor the bravery of my daughter. And I also need to do this for myself because if I do not walk toward the walls of my fears, I will be enclosed and held prisoner by them. I had to throw away the first 3 attempts I made at this in prose form because it kept turning into a chronology of events, procedures, and people using unhealthy coping mechanisms. So I naturally turned to writing poetry as a way of healing and self-discovery. And once I turned what I wanted to share into a narrative poem, eliminating the need to attach a story that was not really true in the first place, things went much better. What I learned from my daughter's cancer. What I learned from my daughter's cancer after being at her side for 5 months through all of the terrible news, the depression of divorcing her husband, leaving behind her work, her apartment, her independence, through difficult explanations to her daughter and son, through chemoport surgery and septic shock, an emergency chopper ride to the trauma center, and 3 weeks battling for her life, the steady drip, drip, drip of IV bloating her almost beyond recognition. Through all of the pressing needs I tried to fulfill as best I could, what I learned in the midst of this chaos is that the busier I was, the more I thought I contributed, the easier it was to hide from the fact of her suffering. What I learned after the long days of doing chores, the futile attempts to help 4 grandkids still have their innocent childhood lives, and sitting beside Beth on the couch, reassuring her that I would take great care, pushing antibiotics, gloved and masked for 10 days, every 8 hours, always using sterile procedure, then day after day and week after week of new stresses and uncertainties. What I learned from my daughter's stage 4 inflammatory breast cancer that has metastasized to her lymph nodes and liver and is now showing up in her sternum is that I had exceeded my capacity and turned her into a burden, that I had opened the cell door to her suffering and moved in with her, this person with her infinite needs. Yes, I was exhausted of her and wanted to just sink into sleep on the cool cell floor beside her. She had become a resource request that I could never hope to adequately fulfill. I, who owed her so much from the years I had been distant, yes, I never wanted to share with anyone what a terribly damaged father I became after the divorce, when Beth, the youngest of 3, was just 16. I almost chose the path to safety rather than stand before you and admit I was not at her high school graduation. Yes, that's the degree of terrible father I had become, unwilling to be in the same room with her mother, and besides, I was back in Kansas City by then, comfortably far away. Eventually, still shrouded in the pain of my failings, what I finally learned from Elizabeth Ann Maple, born November 30th, 1979, is that once again I was not truly present for her, and thus I kept her from speaking her truth, that she needed more from me than just another check. I did, in fact, trivialize the gravity of her situation, as she correctly pointed out, though I did not want to accept that this could be true after all I had done. It pierced like a knife and twisted in my heart. It churned in my guts. What I finally learned is that I had become insulated to the thought that she might die. That in order for her to live again in my heart, it was I who needed to change. What I learned is that my daughter's cancer cannot be fixed with just material things, nor was that ever her expectation. And though I still worry about her needs, and though we continue to give aid, I know that money can never substitute for simply holding space for her, and that yes, she is suffering and will continue to suffer. And yes, she could possibly die, as we all will. But right now, she is still singing jazz sets with her brother, discussing literature and music with friends, reading stories to her children in the soft light of evening, all of the signs of being very much alive. And at least I have finally realized that it's time to roll away the gravestone, to walk into this bright new day together so that we both can live again. And so it is.